Okay. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the International Conference, Public Diplomacy in the Age of Great Transformation, a Post-Pandemic World. My name is Sohn, invited professor at Ewha Women's University, as well as a member of the Korea Association of Public Diplomacy. It is a great pleasure to greet everyone virtually, and the fact that greeting everyone virtually has become pretty normal is a sign of the transformation that we have endured since the beginning of the year. The coronavirus has indeed brought on tectonic changes in every part of the globe and touched every aspect of our lives. So it is a timely and a very crucial exercise to understand how this great transformation has changed the study and practice of public diplomacy, our efforts to win the hearts and minds of foreign publics. We have a great day planned for you today, and let us kick this off by introducing the president of our association, Professor Kisuk of Ewha Women's University, to officially open the day's proceedings.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and good evening to the participants in the United States. And Ambassador Jae-Bok for Public Diplomacy of the Republic of Korea and Director Jie-Ae of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy and honorable speakers and guests, I'm very pleased and honored to host this international conference by inviting world-class scholars from home and abroad, the US, Europe, Australia, and Japan as a part of the annual conference of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy. First of all, I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to esteemed scholars, speakers, and guests from Korea and abroad, honorable members of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy who are participating in today's event through Zoom, and members of the general public who are expressing their interest in our international conference via YouTube for sharing their precious time with us. The KAPD convened its first academic conference on the 2nd of July this year, and many congratulated its foundation with strong support in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic. To my knowledge, the KAPD remains the first and the only academic association for public diplomacy in the world to date. Public diplomacy is not a traditional discipline, but a new academic field established to address the rampant social issues that arose in the era following the September 11 attacks. Indeed, the concept of public diplomacy in the traditional sense existed even during the Cold War years as a way to spread propaganda. This is why Ian Mellison named the post-9/11 model of public diplomacy as the new public diplomacy, to be distinguished from the old one. Public diplomacy in the 21st century aims at mutual understanding and relationship building through genuine dialogue with foreign publics. This idea is also the lesson learned over the long history of human evolution that we can achieve what is truly in our best interest by collaborating with others to pursue shared prosperity and mutual interests. Today, the global order is facing another challenge. These times of great transformation often bring about widespread confusion as we found our line of sight obscured. What we need in times like this is the wisdom of great scholars to gain keen insight into our future. Early this month, Mr. Joe Biden was elected as the President of the United States. And I know one thing clear, that any president of the US will be more aware of the importance of the public diplomacy than current President Trump. However, many of us are still wondering what's going to happen in the New World Order and its impact on public diplomacy. And I believe the keynote speaker, Jung In-moon, the special advisor to the President Moon Jae-in, is the one who would provide us with great insight on this topic. I'm also thrilled with Director Jae Wang's keynote speech on public diplomacy reset, concept, practice, and pedagogy. As the title implies, another leap toward an elevated level. In the first session, Professor R.S. Jaharna and Kadir Ayhan will make presentations on effective strategies of PD under the COVID-19 pandemic and reflections on it. In the afternoon, new media in the post-pandemic world will be examined by Professors Chang Kim and Sohn Kim. In the final session, Professors James Pemont and Jie-Ae will deal with new emerging issues and areas of PD in the post-pandemic world. It is meaningful. Both speakers are dealing with information distortion by fake news or the media. Now, upon briefly introducing today's program, it occurred to me that we have achieved one of the most important goals for which we originally found the KAPD. Until recently, public diplomacy had been mainly studied by political scientists and media and communication scholars, but the silos between these disciplines are too stringent to create synergy, leaving each discipline confined to its own domain. As you can see from today's program, I realized that this conference has paved the way for truly interdisciplinary dialogue and research. We explored sustainable ways for this international conference to help research and education in the long term rather than end up as a one-off occasion. Most presenters have promised to contribute their papers to the inaugural issue of the English Journal of our association, titled The Journal of Public Diplomacy, which will be the first PD journal published next year. The journal will serve as a platform for continued exchanges of ideas between scholars and practitioners. Each session in today's conference will be edited and uploaded on the YouTube with English translated subtitles. We hope that these videos are used as a teaching aid by public diplomacy lecturers around the world. I give my sincere gratitude to the speakers for their future contribution. The annual conference, which will continue until tomorrow, will also feature research seminars on educational diplomacy, public diplomacy policy, and the Korean Wave, and workshops on how to utilize Korean Wave contents in public diplomacy education. I would like to humbly request your continued support and interest in our sessions tomorrow. Before I finish, I'd like to express my deepest appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, particularly Director General Sohn and Ambassador Jae-Bok for their wholehearted and generous support, which made this conference as well as our inaugural conference to take place. I am also very much thankful to the executive member of the association, Han Jun-hye, and staff members who devoted tireless efforts to prepare this conference with a very tight schedule. Without their devotion, this valuable conference could not have been possible. And lastly, we promise that we will continue to do our best for further progress of the KAPD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cho. We are having a little bit of technical difficulties with, not here, but I think through our YouTube channel. So we're going to pause just for a second, well, not a second, but just for a little while we take care of the technical difficulties. So bear with us just for a moment. And they're going to give me a sign when we can go on. So, yeah, well, it may cause a lot of people to turn the channel. So, okay, yes. So we apologize for the technical difficulties. Another thing that we have to live with in this era of YouTube and streaming. So you missed a great opening speech by our president, but the rest of the day filled with wonderful speeches and presentations is awaiting for you. First and foremost, we are very honored to have with us Ambassador Chang Jae-Bok, who is Korea's ambassador of public diplomacy. He will give us his speech, opening welcoming remarks on the transformation that public diplomacy is going through. Ambassador Chang.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Honorable Kisuk, President of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, Honorable Moon Jae-in, Special Advisor to President Moon Jae-in, Dr. Jie-Ae, Director of USC Center on Public Diplomacy, distinguished speakers and guests, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to all the participants to today's webinar on public diplomacy in the age of great transformation. Thank you all for joining us online as well as offline from various parts of the world for the very first international conference organized by the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, KAPD. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very pleased to sponsor this meaningful event. We are about to bid farewell to the year 2020, which must have been a very unusual year for everyone. The spread of COVID-19 has not only affected our daily lives in every aspect, but it also completely transformed the paradigm of public diplomacy. Many cultural and public diplomacy events had to be canceled or rearranged as the pandemic crisis continued. However, our efforts put into public diplomacy have grown even more, using online and offline platforms to reach out to foreign public on a wider scale. Korean diplomatic missions abroad stepped into a new path of digital public diplomacy and explored a variety of innovative methods to effectively communicate with foreign audience. Untagged K-pop challenge, online taekwondo postures competition, and Korea Tourism UCC contests are just a few examples of creative online events that our diplomatic missions delivered this year. Today's webinar is yet another example of how we can expand the frontier of public diplomacy, notably through synergistic collaboration between KAPD and the ministry. Furthermore, as the pandemic crisis called for global cooperation, it has indeed brought a new spotlight to long-standing universal values such as solidarity. In this light, at the early stage of the pandemic, the Foreign Ministry launched the Stay Strong SNS Challenge to spread a message of hope across the world. We also released on YouTube MOFA Insight series featuring some renowned scholars, including Jacques Attali and Michael Sandel, with a view to leading the global discourse on the post-COVID-19 era. As such, this era of new normal that we are working into requires a new approach to public diplomacy. Distinguished guests, on top of the global public health crisis, escalating rivalry between global superpowers and the result of the recent presidential election in the United States are yet again likely to add more fluctuations and unpredictability to the global political landscape. In this time of uncertainty, the importance of strategic public diplomacy is growing fast as a powerful tool to derive steady support and cooperation from our foreign partners and the international community. For example, my ministry produced a documentary video, Enduring Partnership, South Korea and US Relations, to highlight the invaluable friendship that has deepened for the past 70 years. Our embassy in Stockholm also presented 2020 Korean Culture Festival in Sweden online through its own homepage and YouTube channel to provide opportunities for foreign public to experience various assets of Korean culture. In addition, Korea played a leading role in organizing Group of Friends for Solidarity and Inclusion with Global Citizenship Education in UNESCO. This perfectly demonstrates the global will to fight against hate and discrimination amid pandemic crisis. The ministry also hosted a P4G cooperation webinar with experts in Africa to propel multilateral cooperation in terms of green growth and climate change in the post-COVID-19 era. I believe that all these efforts have borne a meaningful fruit, though it may be hard to measure and evaluate. As a potential benchmark, Korea ranked 14th for the first time in the Global Soft Power Index 2020, released by Brand Finance, which hints at the achievement of public diplomacy this year. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope today's webinar to be an agora for Korean and international scholars and experts to have an in-depth discussion on the future of public diplomacy. Throughout this conference, we'll pool our wisdom and knowledge to find the right direction for public diplomacy to contribute to mutual interests of engaging countries as well as to global solidarity. Before I close, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to distinguished speakers for their time and effort to share their expertise and insights. I would also like to give special thanks to KAPD and all the staff members for arranging this timely event. I have every confidence that this webinar would be an important stepping stone for us to leapfrog into a new level of public diplomacy. I wish all of you to stay strong in the fight against COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Chang. He really laid out the emphasis about public diplomacy, especially in the difficult world that we live in. As he talked about throughout the day, we will be hearing from experts from Korea as well as around the world about the different dimensions of this transformation as it pertains to public diplomacy. And to set the tone, we have two special keynote speakers from opposite sides of the Pacific. Let's start off in California, where we have Jae-Wang, who is the director of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. The USC Center for Public Diplomacy is one of the pillars of the study of public diplomacy in the world, I'd like to say. Jay, who is head of the center, is a professor of journalism. I just learned that, Jay, and has written extensively on the role of communication in the process of globalization. I believe he has a book out that is co-authored called Debating Public Diplomacy Now and Next. Jay, good afternoon. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're with us. We are very grateful that you have agreed to spend a part of your Thanksgiving day with us, but we are also eager to hear your thoughts on resetting public diplomacy. So over to you, Jay. No? Yes, there you go. I knew you'd pop up, Jay. Hello, nice to see you again.
Hope you're doing well. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jie-Ae. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I wanted to thank Professor Cho for inviting me. And greetings, everyone from Southern California. And let me first congratulate the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy on its inaugural international conference. I wish the conference great success. And I'm very honored to be invited and to join Mr. Cho In-moon for the opening session. So as we all know, public diplomacy is traditionally understood as a sovereign nation's effort to inform and influence foreign publics through open communications. It is a vital practice to promote national security and economic prosperity through the generation of soft power. But now, public diplomacy is expanding as a field that integrates diplomatic, corporate, and social interests. Is what we call the increasing mainstreaming of public diplomacy. It includes actions taken by non-state actors of growing consequence in the global system. It also implies the requirements of engagement with not just foreign, but also domestic and in-between diaspora publics. And the field has become an increasingly interdisciplinary in theory, concept, and methods. Today, profound and influential societal shifts are reshaping the practice of public diplomacy, and by extension, its study, its pedagogy. Many of these transformative trends have been unfolding against the rapidly changing underlying technological and geostrategic conditions in recent times. While the coronavirus pandemic, along with its intersecting social and economic crises, does not alter the fundamental dynamics already underway that are disrupting our thinking and practice concerning public diplomacy, it is accelerating the change. So given that, how are we to rethink and reset the practice of public diplomacy? And I'd like to take a few minutes to share 5 broad observations. The first observation is that the pandemic obviously is posing serious, sustained threats to social and economic stability around the world. While containing a global pandemic requires unprecedented international cooperation, so far, for the most part, every nation has been fending for itself in combating the spread of the virus. And this has taught us an unflinching lesson that it is either to partner or to perish. This moment in history has highlighted our global interdependence. Everything depends on everything else, and the ways in which public diplomacy can be used to develop our capacity for mutual awareness, understanding, and collaboration, and to demonstrate solidarity and a sense of community. As the world emerges from this crisis, we must nurture and promote public diplomacy capabilities that will enable us to tackle shared challenges going forward, from the environment, cybersecurity, to health and emergency preparedness. My second observation is about recapturing the global imagination of America. The time also calls for a reset and a renewal of American soft power and public diplomacy. The mismanagement of COVID-19 pandemic in the US is increasingly seen around the world as a failure of governance in controlling a major public health crisis. America has suddenly become vulnerable in the eyes of the global public. There has also been uniform disapproval by foreign publics and governments alike of recent US international policies, from increasing tariffs on global imports to withdrawal from international climate change agreements to building the US-Mexican border war. Meanwhile, the dramatic rise of bigotry and xenophobia, amplified by the excess of political rhetoric, especially in the digital space, undermines America's appeal and attractiveness as a nation of tolerance and inclusiveness. In a word, it weakens America's global standing. Now, the world recently watched the US elections with great fascination, lots of trepidation. Clearly, people around the world care about the election result, but above all, America's democratic system that has inspired populations throughout the world. My next observation concerns public diplomacy and our tech economy. The world economy is steadily connected and integrated. This is manifested in the sprawling worldwide economic relations, which now include the fast-growing cross-border trade through e-commerce and the rapid growth of emerging economies and markets. Technological advances provide a key capacity for globalization to develop and expand. Nowadays, every business is a tech business, so to speak, and our economy is a tech economy. As digital innovation is rewriting the rules of our society and economy and society, it also poses significant societal problems, and its future prospects remain indeterminate. We are seeking to establish norms and frameworks to guide digital practices and their associated business models, and to address the manifold implications as demonstrated in three broad policy areas, including data governance, the future of work, and a concentration of power among tech firms. The public's concern over digital technology and its deep personal as well as broad social and geopolitical consequences has increased, and it will only continue to grow. These technology-led developments and their attendant policy issues have a direct impact on the shape of the global marketplace. As some have argued, economic security is national security, because a stable global marketplace requires a functioning global order, which also includes a functioning level of digital trust. So there are important possibilities and, in fact, necessities to bridge the worlds of business and diplomacy, and to reimagine their linkages and their roles as we navigate through these complicated and difficult global policies and issues. Now, public diplomacy is also local. In foreign relations and communication, the compartmentalization of so-called domestic and international is perhaps only meaningful at an analytical level, but certainly not in practice. Examples abound of international policies and actions are extensions of domestic situations, as well as felt influences of international relations on domestic dynamics. Leaders at the local level around the world are embracing international affairs as it relates to a host of urban and community priorities, from economic development and cultural engagement to addressing mounting shared challenges. Subnational diplomacy, for instance, city diplomacy, is a powerful tool for international engagement at the local level. It provides a much-needed anchoring mechanism to generate goodwill, reciprocity between communities and peoples across national boundaries. Its value has risen steeply at a time when national level actors often face or create political and bureaucratic gridlocks. Above all, to thrive in a globalized economy and a diverse society, local communities need cultural and global networks, skills, and competencies. And we need to build broad domestic public support for global engagement and responsible statecraft. Well, last but not least, the great power rivalry and the role of public diplomacy. A nation's socio-economic development engenders political power and international influence with potential impact on the balance of power on the world stage. The political realignments in various parts of the world are multi-layered that defy a dichotomous either-or approach. It is a world of networks, as Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote, quote, intersecting and closely overlapping in some places and more strung out in others, end quote. And it is complicated as we look at the consequential relationship between the United States and China with both converging and diverging interests and values. I am reminded of Walter Lippmann's admonition in 1943 that a nation's conduct of foreign relations, as in all other relations, can only be considered when commitments and power have been brought into balance. Lippmann cautioned the US for prudence and restraint that were, quote, consistently practiced by the founding fathers of not underestimating the risks of their commitments and of not overestimating their own power, end quote. In this age of global connectedness, there is no time to learn from our mistakes in handling critical matters like the US-China relations. Both nations need to exercise responsible statecraft by negotiating expectations of one another, as well as building effective mechanisms to settle disputes and induce agreements. At the same time, there is a vital, probably paramount role that the so-called middle power countries, such as South Korea, can play in navigating the web of nuanced relations around the world. If we see the world as a web of networks, South Korea most likely possesses more power and influence than one might think. That is the soft power of connecting and bridging networks of stakeholders across political, economic, and social dimensions on the world stage. As we stand at this critical juncture, can we escape history that is captured in classic theories of great power rivalry? Or are we trapped by our own imagination that will only make the self-fulfilling prophecy come true? A reckoning from the momentous change in 2020 requires us to rethink our premises and our purposes of public diplomacy. Public diplomacy remains a vehicle to advance policies and to foster restraint and cooperation in dealing with other nations, other societies. It is biased against any form of rigidity and embraces adaptation. Indeed, public diplomacy reflects a nation's enlightened self-interest as opposed to predatory self-interest. It provides critical collective linkages between policy and people, and domestic and international. So I lay out some of these broad thinking and observations, and I'm sorry that my title of the talk says something about concept, practice, and pedagogy, and I hope that we'll have discussions in the future about all these specific areas. How are these trends manifested in the way how we conceptualize public diplomacy, the skill sets we need to practice public diplomacy, and the pedagogy that's required for us to prepare the next generation of our public diplomacy, international communications professionals. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. And again, happy Thanksgiving. I think he laid out a number of interesting points, especially like the very last point he made about the U.S.-China relationship and how public diplomacy would be able to serve as a guiding light in the rough waters that we expect in the future. Now we're back home. And we now have a keynote speaker from speech from Professor Moon Jung-in, who is the special advisor to the President of Korea. He doesn't need much introduction in Korea, but just for our participants from overseas, he is one of the most important voices in Korea's international affairs. He has been an institution at Yonsei University, and he hails from the great island of Jeju. So I think I pointed out all the important things. So Professor Moon, we'd love to hear about your speech on the strategic importance of Korea in the coming new world order.
Professor Sohn, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I'm very sorry for upending the opening session of this wonderful conference. And Professor Jo Ki-Suk, thank you very much for inviting me. I know that you're upset about me being late. And also Ambassador Jae-Bok, thank you very much for being here, because Ambassador Chang and I had a very long, the contact history. I met him at the UC San Diego when I was teaching there. And Ambassador Chang was, at the time, was a student. That was early 1990s, and the time really passes like an arrow. And in fact, I had a breakfast meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China, and one of the topics was public diplomacy, and it was very interesting in the coincidence of my breakfast meeting with him and my talk here. Professor Jo Ki-Suk, the president of Korean Association of Public Diplomacy, asked me to give a talk on COVID-19, global transformation, and South Korean challenges, challenges to South Korea and how to deal with them. It's really big topics, but I will try to conjugate those topics in very precise manner in 30 minutes. 30 minutes or 20 minutes? 30 minutes? Okay, I will try to be any short. Shorter is better. Okay. Anyway, really, COVID-19 was really like a sudden impact, like asteroids hitting the Earth. We never expected these kinds of things, but there were warnings like AIDS, MERS, SARS, and most recently Ebola. But we all thought, all these epidemics, we have a wonderful public health system, therefore we can overcome them. Therefore, this pandemic has never been part of our national security discourses. Okay? It belonged to public health domain. By the way, I'm not going to use a PPT. I will give a very straightforward talk. Shall I use, or which one is better? I will give this talk. Jay Wang did the same things. Okay. And throughout the history, there are many examples. So-called demise of Western Roman Empire. Okay, also the demise of a Han dynasty, which is a really strong dynasty, but that came to an end because of spread of bubonic disease. Therefore, pandemics has a great impact on evolution of human civilization, as evidenced by Arnold Toynbee or William McNeill, and even most recently, Yuval Harari, or Jerry Diamond. Anyhow, we are now facing very stark reality. Now we have more than 50 million people on Earth suffering from the pandemic, and more than 1.3 million people died of the pandemic, And ironically, the United States has become the really focal point of the pandemic. And when we have a pandemics, we all think about the developing countries in Africa, Middle East, or Latin America, Southeast Asia. But now, pandemic does not differentiate whether they are developing countries or developed countries. It has become widespread, touching 5 oceans and 6 continents. But it brought, as Jae-Wang pointed out, really it had brought, transformational impact on world society. The economy is changing. In 1930s, we had the Great Depression. 2008 to through 2012, we had the Great Recession, and now we are going through the Great Lockdown. Now there is a worry that the current Great Lockdown could be much worse than the Great Depression of 1930s. Particularly, it is more so because we are now going through second wave and third wave of the pandemic. Okay, growth is going down, growth rate is going down, unemployment is widespread, and the gap between the rich and poor getting worse as a result of the pandemic. And every country is now suffering from the huge public debts. Okay, if the pandemic becomes protracted, the government debt will be exponentially increasing. South Korea is not exception. Okay, therefore, impact on the economic system has been quite profound. But at the societal level too, now we are having a virtual reality. Okay, distant learning has become the new normal, and this kind of virtual conference has become new normal. We may not go back as before. Okay, and also, as several scholars have warned, including Yuval Harari, surveillance society has become new norms too. Okay, that could remind us of the George Orwell's 1984. And also, as a result of great lockdown, people are suffering from psychological distress, depression. Therefore, new normal is not really good normal. It is a really tragic normal. Okay? It's just really somber. Okay? And political impact is also great. Now every society is going through the big debate, which is better. All countries strive toward achieving liberal goals as prescribed by the like in the theory of justice, John Rawls's political liberalism. They should extend the care to the worst in society. Okay, however, in reality, that is not the case. Great Britain, Italy, even Sweden, they have gone through the whole very utilitarian approach. Okay, save the young first, let all die, and this idea of herd immunity, which has been experimented in Sweden, ended up with very tragic result. The victims are old people. Okay, and there's a greater infection of the COVID-19 in the Swedish society. But there is another argument too, like libertarian arguments. In other words, individual liberty is more important than the interest of community. Okay, therefore, we cannot accept all this forced imposition of mask wearing. Okay, and they are coming out the street with rifles saying that give me freedom or liberty or death. But that is widespread. Even in South Korea, some folks are making, public protest in the street of Gwanghwamun, despite the government, guidance that, not to show up in public, protest. But that has been the case in the United States and European countries. But some countries like Korea, Taiwan, South Korea, Taiwan, to some extent, China, have been successful by adhering to the principle of, communitarian approach. In other words, the interest of community is more important than personal liberty. And that was well preserved. And we have shown, our people have shown the quite great degree of conformity with government instructions and guidance. And that is why we have been quite successful, even though now we have a second wave of, in fact, it is a second wave of, COVID-19 coming out. But as a result of that, we have been talking about, K-public health, K-quarantine, the Korean model of fighting, COVID-19. But anyhow, likewise, it had brought about great impact on political domain too. And the fate of political leaders also tied up to what extent they have been successful in managing the pandemic or not. Likewise, COVID-19's impact on domestic landscape has been quite extensive. And international politics has been affected by the COVID-19. Now we have a new concept of security. In old days, we have been focusing on military security of nation state. Now we are talking about the human security of global society. There is a huge paradigmatic change. Another big, change is what? There has been growing doubt on the birth of globalization. Okay, even if globalization comes back, it will be very much controlled globalization. There's another important implication. Third implication is that if there is a concern on the future of war and peace, because if you follow the 1930s logic, your pandemic accompanies huge recession or depression, and then there will be a social upheaval in every society. Populism, chauvinism will come out, okay, from the coffin of old history. And then when there is a combination of great economic recession with chauvinism and populism, then there is a propensity toward finding scapegoat outside, meaning what? External conflict, as Hitler did in 1930s. Therefore, there is a concern that if this pandemic persists, then there is a good chance that there might be greater conflict in the world. Another implication is what? As you have seen that China, this COVID-19 is called the Wuhan virus and China virus. I personally experienced, I was in Paris and Berlin in the first half of February. In Paris, were people, just pointing to me that the Xinhua, Chinese, okay? And all of a sudden, this COVID-19, was equated with some kind of yellow peril of early, 1900 and 1920s, okay, when there was a yellow peril. And therefore, that led to some kinds of crash of civilization, discourses. And finally, lack of leadership, international leadership, has been extremely conspicuous. Okay. During the days of Ebola attack, the Obama administration took the outstanding leadership in fighting against Ebola. The United States created, huge public fund and created SEPA, okay, and then fought Ebola, even though Ebola was taking place in Africa. But this COVID-19, we do not see that kinds of international leadership. The United States was not taking leadership. On the contrary, the United States just threatened to withdraw from the WHO. European countries was also obsessed, with themselves. No country was taking leadership. China was tainted because of the origin of, COVID-19. Okay. Therefore, China didn't have international leadership and legitimacy to push for the international cooperation. Consequently, there was a lack of international leadership. Ironically, vaccine nationalism has become rampant. That was the international scene. But one thing is very clear. Now we are really concerned about future of the world. What would be world order? When you talk about global transformation, transformation means what? Transformation of existing international order. Existing international order is characterized by loose bipolarity between China and the US, weakened multilateralism, fragmented regionalism. That is the current shape of world order. Okay. Would that be continued or not? There are a lot of speculations. For example, Dr. Kissinger, Henry Kissinger argues that if pandemic becomes protracted, there is a good chance to return to world cities and the new medieval age. Okay. Countries will be shutting down their national borders. They will be seeking very autarchical economic system or very close to regionalism. Okay. And globalization will come to an end. It's a very nightmare situation, but we cannot rule out that possibility. But some people argue that, like John Allen, the president of Brookings Institution, argued that whoever wins this COVID-19 will be writing the history. That the winner of the COVID-19 will be determining the future course of history. Then a large number of scholars argue that the U.S. will be winner. U.S. has a sound, United States has a sound economy. U.S. has a really large pool of talented people. United States a technological edge. United States advantage in energy self-sufficiency. United States has much the dynamic demographic system. Given all these kinds of things, the U.S. will be ultimate winner. Then U.S. will be creating new order and peace in the world. And they call it Pax Americana too. In fact, Joe Biden, made it very clear that the United States will be leading the world again, okay, as the United States did after the Second World War by creating GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs in Trade, Bretton Woods monetary system, United Nations, and also formation of NATO and other America-centered alliance system. The United States created new world in order and also extended the Marshall Plan. Maybe U.S. can take the leadership again. That is a scenario of Pax Americana too, the peace through the United States, through peace through the American hegemonic leadership. But some people like Kishore Mahbani of National University of Singapore takes different view. He argues that, look, China will be winning the game. Okay. Why? Look at the United States. Economy is, American society is in disarray, politically polarized, fragmented, racial tension and conflict have been on the rise. And economy, we can assure of the future of American economy. And more importantly, Kishore Mahbani argues that the United States does not have spiritual vitality. In fact, he was borrowing from George Kennan. When George Kennan wrote an article in Foreign Affairs called under the pseudonym of Mr. X, advocating the virtue of containing the Soviet Union. And that in that article and other books, George Kennan was arguing that the U.S. will be winning the Cold War. Why? U.S. has a spiritual vitality. The Soviet Union does not have spiritual vitality. And Kishore Mahbani was quoting from him saying that China has a spiritual vitality. The United States does not have a spiritual vitality. Therefore, future will belong to China. The Pax Sinica, peace through China, will be much more plausible than the Pax Americana too. Of course, China cannot restore old form of a tributary system, but there could be China Central, what we call the Sino-centralism, China-centric order in Asia Pacific. That is third possibility. Fourth possibility is Pax Universalis. There's a peace through universality. George Bush, 41, made a very historic speech at the United Nations on September 23rd, 1991. After victory in the first Gulf War, he came to the United Nations and he declared the U.S. will not seek Pax Americana anymore. United States will be seeking Pax Universalis, peace through the United Nations, peace through multilateralism. But given the fact that the United Nations and other multilateral institutions have weakened over time, there might be very little chance for the restoration of Pax Universalis. However, if China and the US cooperate each other, and also middle powers like South Korea, Japan, Australia, selected number of European countries, Canada, if they work together, maybe we might be able to restore multilateral order, and we can give us some kinds of attention to the centrality of United Nations and etc. But normatively, it is a correct approach. But practically speaking, that may not be feasible. Finally, there is what continuation of status quo. Okay, I explained about status quo, loose bipolarity between the U.S. and China, and weakened multilateralism, regional fragmentation. And I think that my bet is this: there will be a continuation of status quo. But status quo has three dimensions too. One is improve the status quo, meaning what? U.S.-China relations get better. And worsen the status quo. The U.S.-China relation get worsened. And just continuation of status quo. But given my analysis, I think there will be worsened status quo. Worsened status quo will take form of a new Cold War. On July 23rd, 2020, this year, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, made a very historic remarks at the Nixon Museum. He said that this COVID-19, Wuhan virus, was a result of a lack of transparency on the part of Chinese Communist Party. Chinese Communist Party is repressive of Chinese people. Chinese Communist Party has a global hegemony ambition. If we do not change China, China will change us. And he all of a sudden came up with this lexicon of anti-communism. That is really reminiscent of Cold War. Cold War was all about ideological confrontation. All of a sudden he brought anti-communism to the forefront. And then he argues that we should pursue geopolitical containment of China, economic decoupling of China, and we should pursue techno-alliance to deter Chinese superiority in science and technology. And also he advocated value alliance among like-minded countries or a coalition of democracies to confront Chinese Communist Party. It's really, but in fact, during the days of Cold War, it was all about the ideological confrontation and military confrontation. But now, the US injected economic decoupling and techno-alliance. But this kind of approach has put South Korea in very difficult position. Okay. A lot of people argue that Joe Biden may pursue different policy, but I don't think so. Of course, he will pursue military containment. On economic decoupling, he might be Joe Biden might be much more selective. Technology, selective. Value issue, he'll be as tough as Trump. Therefore, military dimension and the value dimension, there will be a tougher American encirclement of China, Of course, the Biden administration will be using the much softer terms, not like the Trump administration. However, its policy will be tough. And that will put us in an extremely difficult position, okay? If there is a revival of the Cold War in the form of a new Cold War, that will restore all the bloc diplomacy, okay? And that will put us in a very difficult position of, the dilemma of existential choice. And also, if China and the US, okay, rivalry fails to be controlled, then there is a danger of Thucydides' trap, as Graham Allison pointed out. Then, as he said, that there could be second Cold War. Okay? And also, economic decoupling would politicize the process of globalization, diminish our welfare, and that will really foster the end to East Asian regionalism. And also, all this pandemic crisis of multilateralism, waning economic wealth and human security issues will put us in very difficult position. Okay? And also another our dilemma is this, as a result of pandemic, if the US and China relations get worsened, then it will be much difficult for us to solve the North Korean nuclear problem peacefully. And also we got to be aware of that the rise of the yellow peril and the possibility of a crash of civilization, okay? Because US-China rivalry will eventually take the form of this racial dimension too. Then what kind of choices do we have? We have at least, I would say that 5 choices. One is pro-American balancing. Okay, America is hegemon, and we take side with hegemon, and deter the rise of revisionist power China. Another possibility is bandwagoning China. Okay, China. That really goes back to 17th centuries. Okay, during the King Injo, Yi dynasty. Okay, there was a rising Qing dynasty, declining Ming dynasty. At the time, we took side with declining hegemon called the Ming dynasty. Qing dynasty prevailed, and there was a, we all know the Byungja Horan. Okay, and as a result, we had the worst humiliating moment in Korean history. Therefore, people argue that, look, let us make a much more cold analysis of reality, okay? China is rising, US is declining, therefore we should take sides with China. The other approach is that let us pursue standalone policy, okay? We have been getting sick and tired of all this bloc diplomacy, okay? Neither of them is workable. Neither taking side with US or taking side with China will be workable. We should pursue our own independent line. By doing what? One is a very passive way of pursuing standalone strategy. That is what? Declaring permanent neutrality of the Korean Peninsula. Another one is what? Let us become much more credible middle power with a nuclear armament. Fourth approach is muddling through approach. Okay, that is what? Economy with China, security with the United States. We should muddle through. Muddling through is a nice word, but it's like walking on the tightrope, extremely dangerous. But like during the period of President Kim Dae-jung, we could do that because US-China relations was good. Clinton administration and Chang were in good terms. That is why we could play this game. But given the current tough and tense confrontation between Beijing and Washington, it will be extremely difficult for us to work on the tightrope like that. Finally, the transcending this sandwich trap. That means what? All those 4 approaches have a much higher cost than the real benefit, then we got to take a much more, imaginative diplomatic move. That means what? Let us create a new order, okay, so that we can get out of this bloc diplomacy. Then, in what way? Fostering Northeast Asian economic community, promoting multilateral security cooperation regime, okay. And therefore, we work with Japan, Australia, and other like-minded countries so that we can prevent the rise of new Cold War between China and the United States. Therefore, we pursue more proactive approach. In order to pursue these kinds of transcending strategy, inter-Korean relationship should be improved. Then my personally favor, of course, most of Korean people, particularly conservative people, would favor this pro-American balancing. We should take side with the United States. Okay, some nationalists would argue that we should take side so we should pursue standalone strategies. Ordinary people might want muddling through strategy, okay. And very some few historians would argue for bandwagoning China. Okay. But I personally prefer this transcending approach. We should play a key role in creating new order so that we can get out of all this bloc diplomacy. Then how can we do that? And there is a so-called, how do we prepare this global transformation and changing, security, and economic challenges to, South Korea. First, I want to emphasize the importance of a smart diplomacy. Smart diplomacy means what? Setting the priority of national interest right, okay? And should be able to articulate policy goals with our policy instruments and resources. And also, most important thing in pursuing smart diplomacy is contextualized intelligence. We should have a better intelligence of understanding and judging about our external environment. And also, we should have an imagination and very flexible strategic positioning. That is what I mean by smart diplomacy. Another element is principled diplomacy. We cannot pursue anemone diplomacy. We should adhere to our principles. We should be flexible, but we should not be opportunistic. And also political leadership should have courage and resoluteness. That is what I mean by the principled diplomacy. Third is a national consensus diplomacy. Korean society is extremely polarized. Unless we create a national consensus, we cannot pursue effective, diplomacy. We should seek public support. We should pursue more inclusive deliberation on the agenda of foreign policy and national security. Third, finally, I would advocate the maximization of public diplomacy at home and abroad. Then what kinds of public diplomacy? I would suggest that we should find new niches such as the K-quarantine to deal with the pandemic. And also now Korea has become a success story of graduating from the developing to developed countries. Therefore, Korea development assistance model can be another very important asset of public diplomacy. And also, now we are in the process of the peacemaking on the Korean Peninsula. And we have been quite successful in sending peacekeeping forces abroad under the auspices of the United Nations. And particularly our Jaitung troops in Arbil have been very, very successful. Therefore, that could be another important asset of our public diplomacy. But finding niches is one thing, but the setting agenda is another. Now we have 10th biggest economy in the world. Okay, I would say that we have quite great deal of public power, soft power. Therefore, it is time for us to we should be able to set the agenda in international fora. And also, another important element of public diplomacy is the expansion of our international constituents. Okay, and also we need to cultivate the horizontal networks. We have been doing quite well, but we should move further. Okay, I would say that the current cultivation of networks and formation of international constituents would be on the threshold level. We haven't really crossed the threshold. Therefore, we should be more active on that one too. Finally, it is very important to show legitimacy and leadership in pursuing public diplomacy. Without legitimacy, you cannot be successful in pursuing public diplomacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Moon. I believe you're having some, I think on the YouTube people that are viewing, we've had some difficulty. We apologize. But later on, all of our discussions today will be uploaded onto YouTube. So you may, listen in on all the important points made later on. We're going to take a quick break during which the people here will be conducting an essential part of any Korean event, the family photo session. We'll have a quick break for our audience that are joining us online. Consider this, I guess, a coffee break or a bathroom break, whichever you'd like. So we'll be back shortly after we do our photo sessions. So, so we'll start our family photos.